Shalom, shalom, everybody. Ariel Tzadok here from the KosherTorah School, found online at www.KosherTorah.com. We are recording now live. Obviously, you guys are going to also watch this in the future, but we are on a very, very special time and night. It is now the 5th of October, 2020, which on the secular calendar really doesn't mean much. But on the Hebrew calendar, it is the 18th day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei. We are right now in the intermediate days of the Sukkot holiday. So our appropriate greeting for this time is Mo'adim L'Simcha, Hagim Uzmanim L'Sason. Now, we are on now the 4th night of the intermediate days. For those of you who have any familiarity with the Sukkot holiday, especially from its mystical or kabbalistic observance, we have an old tradition of Zoharic origins, wherein which on the 7 nights that we sit in the Sukkah, we invite in the neshamot, the souls of the 7 patriarchs, each one per night, to come and have their presence embrace us. The 7, of course, are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, Joseph, and David. Well, being that tonight is the 4th night of the holiday, this corresponds to the night of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses, our teacher, the head of all the prophets. What an appropriate night for us to be discussing now the subject of prophecy. And we're not going to be discussing prophecy from a theoretical or even fantasaical point of view. Oh, no, no, no. For those of you who know our KosherTorah school, we get this, you will, down and dirty here. We're here to teach the real deal, the real teachings of the Prophetic Kabbalah from their biblical origins forward. And tonight, that's exactly what we're going to do. And there's also something other very special about this evening. Today, the 18th of Tishrei, is the Hilula, the Aliyah, the ascent of one of the great and holy rabbis, who is revered today as one of the great tzaddikim of the last few centuries. And of course, I speak of none other than Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. All right? Ruach Adonai Tahanenu Bagan Eden. So, it's a very appropriate and auspicious time for us to be discussing what we're going to be discussing. Because you see, there is so much misunderstanding, mythology, about what it really means to be a prophet or Ruach HaKodesh. Now remember this. It is a very clear teaching, none from a source, none less than what we claim to be Eliyahu HaNavi. Remember Eliyahu? Big guy. Very famous book called The Teachings of Eliyahu, Tana Deve Eliyahu, specifically from the section called Eliyah Rabbah, chapter 9, wherein which the Midrash states in the name of Elijah the prophet himself that heaven and earth will give witness that anyone, man or woman, Jewish or Gentile, free person or slave, understand that today in a political or psychological or even economic situation, all can receive what we call Ruach HaKodesh, depending on or based upon one's actions, or in other words, what one does. You see, there's always been a terrible misunderstanding. I would even go so far as to call it a false teaching. To believe what is and is not Ruach HaKodesh or a prophet or who can achieve these things. And in a moment, I'm going to be quoting to you from one of the masters of the last 1,000 years who truly understood the prophetic tradition, and I suspect, probably more than suspect, practiced them. And I'm speaking none less than the one who most people would never in a million years believe was a mystic. I'm speaking of course, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, the famous Rambam Maimonides. We're going to quote from his Moreh Nebuchim, his Guide to the Perplexed, in just a moment. Just a quick word about Maimonides. You got to understand something about rabbinic Judaism in general. Now, we've discussed this many a time, and it's important that we reiterate it over and over so that people always have a grounding. Torah was given to us, Mount Sinai, God, Moshe Rabbeinu. We all know what the Torah says, okay? That is our life and the length of our days. But since the time of the building of the second temple, our Torah has been in the hands of our great and holy sages. Now, who are these great and holy sages? Why don't we just refer to them as prophets? I mean, you had Moses. Moses was a prophet. He passed things on to Joshua. Joshua was prophetic. And on through. You had Samuel. And then, of course, you had all these other prophets. You had Natan. You had Achia Shiloni. Of course, famous Eliyahu Hanavi. Elisha. Of course, we have Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and the 12 minor prophets. Or we have all these guys. What happened to them? Where did they all go? How is it that we made this shift from prophetic Torah in the days of the first temple, even through the Babylonian exile, to where we're at today? Because if you look at Judaism today, the likes that you're going to find represented on the internet and the social media at your local Hebrew bookstore, and you go, gee, this isn't like Isaiah. This isn't Ezekiel. How come I don't have these visions like Zechariah and Ezekiel seeing, Gog and Magog? I want that cool stuff. Where is it? It's never gone away. It's always been there, and it is to this very day. But you got to understand how things move. Like it says in the book of Kohelet, there is a time and a purpose for all things under heaven. All right? Just like you have modulation waves in the movement of energy, there's you have modulation waves in the movement of consciousness and human history and the like. With the ending of the period of the first temple, the removal of the Ark of the Covenant and all that, the rebuilding of the second temple, which is only an empty shell of the first. Prophecy, our sages say, came to an end with the final prophecies of Zechariah, Haggai, and Malachi. Now, might have there been one or two extra guys out there whose words were not recorded for posterity? Yeah, perhaps. But what happened? Was it like a door just closed and that was it? And we're all got, kicked out? I guess some people believe that in their lack of knowledge of history. Oh, no. You see, the secrets of prophetic ascent not only have never been forgotten or never been lost, they've never been ceased to be practiced. And our people, our leaders, and people who even aren't leaders, have been practicing this stuff, 2,500 years, all since the biblical days. Ein kol hadash tahat hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. So, if we're still doing the same stuff, how come we're not having the same results? Bingo! Now that's the right question. Rambam addresses that in his Moreh Nebuchim. So, let's dispel with fantasy and get down to facts. Now, take a look in our Bible, and you will have the experience of one of the great seers, S-E-E-R, right? We call him a Jose, if you will, but he's not a Navi. He's not a prophet. And I'm speaking, of course, of Daniel. Now, I have a commentary on Daniel, and we're actually working on getting it to press with a whole bunch of other stuff to explain a lot of what we're talking about like right now. Daniel is our case in point. If you look at how the Hebrew, the Torah, the Jewish Bible is put together, we have the three sections: the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. And if you look at Daniel, Daniel is not included in the prophets. Daniel is included in the writings. You can say, well, good Lord, this is a guy who sees the Ancient of Days. He has all these visions. He's speaking with Michael and Gabriel. If that's not a prophet, what is? Well, it's not a prophet. Look throughout the entire book of Daniel and you'll see one thing that's missing. The one phrase, thus saith the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Daniel, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, etc., saying. You see that every other prophet, but not Daniel. Why? God didn't want to talk to Daniel? Let's not get personal here. That's kind of silly. Okay? Nothing like that. You see, there are grades. There are levels, if you will, levels of consciousness, levels of exposure, levels of access to higher realms and dimensions. When we entered into a phase of human history, which in Torah we call the galut, the exile, this disconnected us from a specific level of psychic access. Essentially, collective humanity was blocked at a certain level of expanding consciousness. Could we not tap into the highest levels? Yeah, you still can. But just because you tap in doesn't mean you get a message to take out. That's the big difference. That's the difference between, if you will, prophecy and Ruach HaKodesh. You see, if God wants to send a message, God knows how to do it. He doesn't need you or me to, figure it out. But no more messages. We can ascend. We can go hang out with the malachim. We can chat and say, hey, what's happening in Shemayim? What's going on? What's the future foretell? Can we influence this and can we do that? Yeah, we do that all the time. That's for people who know this stuff. This is normal what we do. But hey, God, is there anything that you want to say to the world? Anything you want to say to Bnei Israel? Nope. Lord, we got all kinds of stuff, crazy things happening in our society today. I made the descent. I'm here before your throne. Is there anything you want, to tell me that, I can bring back to Bnei Israel or to the social media? And I could say, I had this ascent and Hashem told me, and thus saith the Lord. Anything? Nope. Okay. That's where we're at. So, why is this important? Because today, yes, many can ascend, but where we go and what we see, that's the big deal. And for centuries, our sages have taught us the right paths. We have in the Mishnah, in Tractate Hagigah, the famous teachings about Ma'aseh Merkava, or the work of the chariot. That's exactly what we're talking about. This is the biblical, what we call prophetic Kabbalah. Now, these are techniques, these are tools that have been passed down since the days, most likely from before Sinai itself, about how to expand human consciousness, how to perfect human behavior, how to refine human morals and values, so as to fine-tune both our intellects and imaginations, and working through the two, learn how to transcend the physical limitations of this world which is around us to experience a higher and greater reality, and to interact with it. That is what Daniel did. Daniel knew the secrets of ascent, practiced them, and he wrote his book to tell us all about it. And Daniel, he's not talking to Hashem. He's talking with Michael, he's talking with Gabriel, and you read other literature that came out of this period. This is called Hechalot literature, Merkava literature, ascent literature. We have it all the way down through the centuries, Enochian literature, where we had the likes of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael, who would make ascents and talk with Metatron. I've taught these things to you guys for years. So this is real. This is done. So who's this for and why are we doing this? Well, let's put it all into a little context. Just a little bit. One mitzvah of the Torah, one commandment. Now, here's something we discussed in our previous lessons. Go check these out on my YouTube page. where I made the distinction between what I call Torah of Judaism and universal Torah. All right? Some will call universal Torah the Sheva Mitzvot, the B'nai Noach. I don't like using such terms because I think it's very limiting in structure. I think we have to expand the terminology so as to enable the construct in the mind to recognize that we're dealing with is universal truth. Now, our universal truth is, of course, that God is in everything and everywhere, and that there's a natural order and flow to the universe. We call this the universal or cosmic Torah. In the Christian tradition, they call it the Logos, the Word. The Islamic tradition, they understand the exact same way as we do about Torah. They call it the universal Quran. All right? The Chinese tradition, the Oriental tradition, they understand it as the Tao. When you truly understand the underlying psyche of all of these teachings, you recognize they're all pointing in the same direction, towards the same universal experience. And that is truth. So, when we want to talk about, in quote, spiritual development, psychic acquisition, this is equally universal truth. That is what the Tana Devei Eliyahu taught us that I quoted to you moments ago. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what your background. Now, I've shared with you something very important about our KosherTorah school. And I've discussed this in previous classes, and I'll reiterate it here. I believe in the power of the light. I believe. I have experienced what I call the light, or if you will, levels of consciousness experience, this Tao, this universal Torah, the truth of what we've been talking about. All right? I can't tell you what it's like. I'm not going to tell you, follow me, believe me. Who the heck? We're all, in this together, guys. In that respect, what I want you to do is to learn to see with your own eyes, not mine. So, rather than me try to convince you that certain of your present political, moral, or other persuasions or points of view or attitudes are wrong or against the Torah or sinful, I mean, we're gonna really debate and argue. I'm right, you're wrong. You're wrong, I'm right. Right? Where does that end up? It ends up with anger, division, strife, and nothing accomplished. So rather than me try to convince you to do as I say, why bother? I'm just gonna say, hey, you want to see the light? There it is. You want to go? I'll show you how to get there. You want to try a different path because you don't like the one I'm showing you? Knock yourself out. See if it leads you to where you want to go. And if it does, cool and groovy. And if it don't, oh well, then you'll learn the hard way. For years, as a rabbi, I've tried to teach people do things this way. But I've learned that there's natural resistance, all right? Carl Jung speaks about this in psychology, gives it the psychological understanding. Our sages refer to this, the kabbalists refer to this as the klipot, the forces of evil. Got it. Okay, you know what? Whatever. I haven't lost my New York accent. Whatever. Why? Because if you are going to, in quote, know the truth, then you're going to have to experience it for yourself and recognize what it is. So, recognize this. There is truth with a small case t, subjective truth, and then there is truth with a big case t, an objective truth. And many a time, people who have experiences always blur the case. They don't know the difference between one and the other. You can go online, and I've done this. I look at social media, and I look at all of the record of people who claim to have had spiritual experiences. Many of them come out of the Christian tradition, more so the evangelical, some even the Catholic, in which they claim that they've either had dreams or they've died and gone to heaven, and everyone is seeing this, and this one is talking to this one, and this one's talking to that one, or people are channeling. This one's talking to the angel Gabriel, this one's talking to the angel Michael, and you listen to all these things that everybody is saying, and everybody's got a different story to tell than everybody else. And it kind of makes you wonder, gee whiz, what's going on? And the answer, obviously, is something we know very well from both analytical psychology and our laws of prophecy, outlined by none other than someone who knew them from experience, Rambam Maimonides. Just like it's written in the Mishnah Torah, no two prophets ever saw the same vision. Why? Because God wants to confuse everybody? No. Because like we've discussed in previous discussions, all right? We're going to get into this tonight, and we're going to get into this literally all year round. All my classes, I want to teach the prophetic Kabbalistic teachings so that you can put them into practice. I'm going to give you techniques. I'm going to give you chants. I'm going to give you sounds. I'm going to give you names. And I'm going to reiterate over and over and over and over. This is how it's done. This is what we do. Why? Because maybe if I repeat myself 100 times, you might hear me once. I don't know why psychology is like that, but it is. So here we go again. At least for me, it's again. Understand the nature of what we call angelic language. This is why I love the teachings of Rabbi Chaim Vital, right? Rabbi Chaim Vital was what I call an eclectic Kabbalist. If anybody met the description of being a complete weirdo, it was Rabbi Chaim Vital, HaKadosh, Alav Shalom, God bless him. This was a guy who clearly was out of his mind and out of this world. Kind of like, of all people, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And I certainly don't mean this in any negative way. On the contrary, when I say they were out of their minds and out of this world, I don't mean that in a negative at all. I mean, they were so far beyond the limitations of this finite structure that everything they saw was from such a profound point of view that people had a hard time grasping it. I'll give an example. Although I am not a student of the Breslov school, when I studied the Likutei Moharan, the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, I recognize the source material from which he is quoting almost off the top of his head. I recognize in the nature of the flow of his material, the intuitive, the psychic, the just open flow, rather than trying to be rigid and rational. He's just allowing it to flow. This is the prophetic spirit, which I'm talking about. He had it. How do you know? Because you see it in the nature and the flow of his words. So when I look at the commentaries that are written on his material, I go, no, they're not getting it. They're not tapping into really his source. And I look at his stuff, and his writings are like this beautiful movement, like Tai Chi. He's just like a natural expert of the flow. His mind, I've written about this, I call it mental kung fu. Right? He's able to tap into this, and he's flowing with that, and he grabs from this side, he grabs from that side. He's able to take it, tie it all together in a nice little package. And unless you're able to dance and move with him in that fluidity of movement, you're never going to grasp how profound he was. They say of Rabbi Nachman that he might have suffered from depression. Boy, oh boy, I certainly wouldn't blame him. You know, you get to a certain level, a certain height, a certain understanding of wisdom and understanding, and then you look around you at all the darkness that's there, that people just don't get it in spite of however hard you try to get it across. That's pretty depressing. But yet, his Torah transcends both space and time. In his day, and through many years after, yeah, there were those who followed him. But all of a sudden, in this generation, his Torah has exploded, grown like the rising sun. Why? Because as we say in Hebrew, davar be'ito matov, everything in its time, everything in its place. Only in this generation have there risen those people who have what it takes to tap in and dance his dance, go with his flow, and tap into his energy. That's why you have such an unconscious, almost a passion, almost an irrational passion for people who do crazy things to try to get to his graveside for Rosh Hashanah. And this year, when we had the COVID and things, you had thousands of people who still showed up at the border. They weren't allowed in because there's this magnetic energy that attracts. You see, this is that light that I'm talking to you about. He had it. The Baal Shem Tov, I think it was his grandfather, great-grandfather, he had it. Right? Rabbi Chaim Vital, he had it. And years before him, Maimonides Rambam had it too. And I can throw in Yosef Karel, the famous author of the Code of Jewish Law. I can throw in a half a dozen other people. Of course, Avraham Abulafia, who, mind you, picked it up from Maimonides himself. So you have this entire Masorah, as we call it, this continuity of things. And we recognize this not so much in the written word, but in the flow that the words take. That's how you recognize the nature of what we're talking about here. So, I want to get you into that. I want to get you into that flow. I want to break that rigidity that's locking your minds and into the flow of the psychic stuff. And you might go a little crazy. You remember, the biblical prophets were all called Meshuggah. I don't know how close I'm getting to it, but I've certainly been called Meshuggah, crazy, from time to time. And I've gotten to the point where I believe it in the words of, good old Butler, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Because you know something? This is part and parcel of the wisdom, in which you learn the external Torah and live by it, and you experience the internal Torah and allow it to open your vision to show you how the external Torah, halakha, is to be expressed and observed in that unique way for you. There we go. I want to get it right on the camera there. So anyway, that is what we're talking about here. So before we go on into our little technique tonight, I want to share with you something from, as I said, Maimonides. Moreh Nebuchim. If you've never studied the Moreh Nebuchim, here it is, the Guide to the Perplexed, the English version. Mind you, Rabbi Nachman never liked this book. He said, no, I don't go with it. Why? Because it's a bad book? No. Because it expresses things in a very different way than how he thought. Rabbi Nachman is one of those fluid minds, that prophetic spirit. If, and maybe he was, alive in the days of the Bible, he definitely would have been a biblical prophet. You would have looked at him and said, this guy's out of his mind. Remember, out of your mind doesn't mean a negative bad thing. It means that you're above the mind, which is actually, from the point of spirituality, a very good thing. You know who was like that? In my day and age, I knew Rav Yitzhak Kaduri, alav shalom. I knew Rav Kaduri. Studied with him in Bethel. Even had some private time with him from time to time. And this guy was out of this world. I remember with my own personal experience being with him, and I seen his eyes. Do you ever see the cats, they're looking all around, they see things that you and I don't see? Rav Kaduri was like that too. I remember being in Bethel with him. He used to smoke cigarettes on a long cigarette holder. And he used to fly around, moving his cigarette holder, making things in the air. He's doing really weird stuff. Now, I remember in private times when I would be alone with him. It was very few, but he allowed me that. And I could see in the nature of his mentality, he was here and somewhere else at the same time. Not in a psychotic negative way, but his consciousness learned to transcend the limitation of this space and time. I've seen it. I experienced it. Baba Sali, he was like that too. Rav Sharabi, alav shalom, was like this as well. And I'm certain that's exactly how Rabbi Nachman was. And I am certain that's how all the great prophets were before that. With that example, that role model, I have learned not to be so connected to the rationale of this world. And if I want to go into La La Land, I will. So, to those who don't like it. Okay. Just told you I'm nuts. And I admit it. Yishtabacha Borei. Anyway, getting back to business here. Maimonides. He's considered this rationalist. But Maimonides understood the nature of the prophetic experience. He puts it into the terminology of Aristotelian philosophy because that was his milieu. All right, everybody's got their milieu, meaning the time and the place and the context. This is how it was in Egypt in his day. So he spoke in, quote, in the language of everybody who was around. Now, in section 2, chapter 32 of the More Nebuchim, he outlines what prophecy is and what it's not. He states like this, something we've taught here, Abu Lafia has taught, and everybody's taught ever since. You don't just become a prophet. God just doesn't talk to you like ringing the doorbell. All right? For example, I could be sitting here having lunch, Robin will tell you, right? And all of a sudden, in the middle of lunch, ding dong, the doorbell rings. I guarantee it's not God at the doorbell. It's not a malach. It's probably the mailman or the neighbor or something, right? Okay. The point is, that's not the way prophecy works. We have a fantasy, a delusion that that's the way prophecy works. Many of you might remember what at least used to be a funny skit by the comedian who has now got, fallen on, bad reputation, Bill Cosby, Noah and the Lord. If you've never heard Noah and the Lord, it's like Noah's just minding his own business and there's a doorbell and God speaks to him. It's a very funny skit, but that's not what prophecy was. Maimonides states very clearly, you know what? I'm going to read to you what he states here about what and how prophecy is. All right? And I'm going to quote to you from the Pines version. Again, it's volume 2, page 361, quoting from section 2, chapter 32 of Maimonides. It's 73b for those of you who want to find it in the original Hebrew. And he states like this. Things are as follows, kind of. When, in the case of a superior individual who is, he calls it here, perfect, with respect to his rational and moral qualities, his imaginative faculty is in its most perfect state. And when he has been prepared in the way that you will hear, he will necessarily become a prophet, inasmuch as this is a perfection that belongs to us by nature. He then goes off and says, yeah, it's natural. And I'll explain what he said here in a minute. But, like we've learned before with Daniel, right? Rambam says there's also, today we have the Yeshua. Sometimes Hashem doesn't talk to us. But there's Ruach HaKodesh stuff that is sent. So what is he talking about? All this perfection with the rational and the moral. Real simple. Love Chaim Vital, because he puts this into great words. We have what we know as the 10 Sefirot, outlined, taught us from the Sefer Yetzirah and onwards. We understand that these are attributes, universal energetic forces. Now, we understand them within the context of our tradition. And let me remind you the very wise words of Carl Jung, who understood the nature of how expressions are in the collective unconscious. Do not go slicing and dicing different cultural expressions, trying to mush-mash them together and say they're all the same. Don't try to embrace that which is not yours, because it's not going to work. Carl Jung refers to this as feigning a legacy that is not one's own. Lubavitcher Rebbe expressed this in his own way. And in Kabbalah, we recognize that we have a path that we walk. We call it Kedusha, holiness. And everyone has their own right way of how that has to be. But understand this, and this is a point that was made very clear by Abu Lafia, Rashash, and everybody else. We need what we call in Kabbalah tikkun, rectification, refinement of attributes. Okay? In other words, you got to get your, blankly blank. You got to get your act in order. You got to have proper balance of the 10 Sefirot. And Rabbi Moshe Cordovero has written a very great book called the Tomeh Devorah, the Palm Tree of Deborah, which teaches how to embrace the personality attributes as we learn them through the 10 Sefirot. And you have to know proper balance, proper harmony. You have to know when to be merciful and when to be cruel. You have to know when to love. You have to know when to hate. You have to know when to be one way and when to be another. And recognize that it's a dance, a fluid movement, not defined by rigidity. Go study the Tomeh Devorah for this. This is why it's there. But now, With this being said, these are the necessary practices or preparations along the way. And what I'm going to share with you in this class is something that's going to accentuate that. Rambam, as we know, is a brilliant academician. Our Talmudic tradition knows also that you got to have a good, intelligent brain, rational mind. For someone whose brain is made out of cottage cheese, where it's all mishmash, and you can't think to save your life, you're never going to experience the psychic intuitive realm in any successful form, simply because the vessel that is required, the intellect, to receive the intuitive psychic influx isn't strong enough. And it's like trying to put a glass of water in a cup made of toilet paper. It's just gonna, collapse. It's just not structured for that type of reception. So the intellect needs to be strong, sharp. That's why, for example, in our traditions, we study Talmud and Halakha, what we call Pshat, so as to sharpen the mind, to make a strong vessel. But that vessel requires then that it be filled. And the filling is what we call intuition, the intuitive. And that, of course, takes us into the psychic. That takes us into realms of consciousness. We call that the Sefirat Chokhmah, the world of Atzilut, outside of the realms of the intellect. Remember what the intellect is. The intellect is that part of consciousness which connects us to this external world and everything about it. This external world is for us an illusion. Attachments to it is considered an illusion. And that is why you'll find those people who truly desire to ascend above do not place focus and success in focusing externally, focus inside. But, of course, there's practicalities of having to live, etc., and so on, but not the focus where people are at as we see today. That materialistic outlook is the contradiction of the Torah of Ascent. But with that being said, let's focus on the Torah of Ascent. The intuitive, the psychic, the imaginative. In recent classes, we've talked about this. I shared with you, for example, how you could use the imaginative faculty to actually and realistically astral project yourself or remote view yourself to places around the world through space and time. Even to go to the grave of Rabbi Nachman at a year like this one, which it was closed off because of the COVID virus. And yeah, if you trained yourself to do this, you could actually do it. You could have a real experience. Many of us have had dreams in which they are so intense, so real, that we wake up and go, wow. You will not necessarily remember every single rational detail, but you will remember every single vivid experiential, emotional context of that dream. And that's exactly it. You see, in the realm and order of the worlds, here we are in this physical realm of consciousness, corresponding to what we call nefesh, dealing with the external outside world. We call that malchut. Well, in the path of ascent, you have to have that energy, that passion, sefirat yesod. We call that libido, the introversion of creative energy. People today waste that in sexuality. Yeah, it's supposed to be sexual, inappropriate, monogamous, relationships, husband and wife and stuff like that. But beyond that, you have to be able to take that passion and invert it and ascend up the ladder. And it takes you into the Sefirot called Hagat Nahi, Hesed, Gabor, Teferet, Netzachot, Yesod. We call this the world of Yetzirah, or the realm of emotions. This is the realm of the angels. This is why whenever you meet an angel, they are always very fiery and passionate about one thing or another. And that's just the way they are, because that's the nature of the Yetziratic experience. So when we ascend to this realm. There's no way around it. That's just the way it is. So we allow our imaginative faculty to allow our minds to expand and to experience and to allow it to flow. Some people are very good at this, and they're able to experience and tap into such deep, deep imaginative faculty, and then take that and crystallize it in structures of words. Those who are the best of this, of course, are novelists, and we have a whole bunch of great novelists. I'm sure you know the works of J.R. Rowling's in the Harry Potter world, the works of Frank Herbert and the Dune world. And of course, we could apply this also into motion pictures, George Lucas and the whole Star Wars worlds. Now, this is all fantasy. It's all make-believe. But how much of it are they tapping into something real? Not necessarily in the identification of individual characters, Master Yoda or the like, but in the wisdom, the teachings, and the structures that underlie these characters, so that emotionally, psychically, something deep within, people are attracted to any one of these worlds with a very deep, intense connection, because there's something that's real there. Now, this is what we need to focus on. How to get into these, in quote, realms without getting lost in delusional fantasy. So, for example, I'm going to go off into my meditative state, and I'm going to allow my imagination to run wild, and all of a sudden I'm flying in the air on my purple unicorn, and I have a big loud crash. I just bumped into the back engine of the USS Enterprise. And I'm saying, what the heck's the Enterprise doing here? And I go in there, and at the helm is Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, father and son. Wait a second, they're not supposed to be in Star Trek, they're in Star Wars. What's going on? Isn't that how dreams are? All kinds of weird overlapping symbols and stuff like that? Okay, that's what I'm helping you understand. Because if I'm flying on my, quote, purple unicorn and I bump into the Enterprise and Darth Vader's on board, I got to ask, okay, what are all these conflicting symbols? Where are they all coming from? And what do they mean to me? Now, this is the one beautiful thing. Chaim Vital explains to us the nature of what we call klipot, the husks, the shells. We call them, if you will, delusionals or forces of evil. These things which cloud our minds like cloudy glasses. That's what that type of imagery would be. So if I'm having a fantasy, a vision, or a dream, and again, my purple unicorn bumps into the Enterprise, the first thing I take a step back and say, okay, what does this mean to me? In all due respect, why am I flying a purple unicorn? All right, I'd rather have a white one, right? My purple, right? I prefer purple elephants. Of course I'm kidding. But I have to ask myself, I have to inquire. I write this stuff down in what we call a dream journal. All right? Yeah, purple unicorns. Bumped into the Enterprise. Darth Vader's on board with Luke Skywalker and their friends. Weird stuff. What does it mean to me? Write it down in my journal. No idea what it means. Crazy stuff. Maybe it's all nonsense. Maybe I ate too much pizza or ice cream before I went to bed at night. Freud writes about that, and he took it right out of the Talmud, Tractate Brachot, which speaks sometimes dreams are not as kosher as you think. But write it all down. Days can go by, weeks can go by, months or years. And all of a sudden, I have an experience. I read something, I learn something, I see something new. And it reflects back. And I go, something? That means something to me. And then I go back, flipping through my journal, my dream diaries stuff, and I go, I understand this now. It was a message for me. Just like Daniel received messages from the angels, and the angel said, seal them for the future. That's exactly what your dream language is today. The symbols and the visions that you see are seals meant to be open in their time. So the more that you balance your emotional state, corresponding with the Sefirot, remember Talmud Devorah stuff, the more you clarify your mind and create that structure of strong clarity, emotional stability, You make the vessel able to receive the light. So when that imaginative faculty is now coming through, rather than see something as a purple unicorn bumping into the Enterprise, you might see it as an ascent through the palaces or a ladder going up to heaven. If you maintain a connection to biblical teachings, study Torah, study our traditions, and embrace your mind, fill your mind with all the symbols and meanings of the Bible and holiness and like, these are the symbols that are going to pop into your head as opposed to purple unicorns and the USS Enterprise. All right? And as such, then you're going to start to associate and recognize that what you are seeing is a different version, because everybody's version is different, of exactly what Ezekiel saw or Isaiah saw. And then you're going to go, oh, I'm really there. I'm really seeing it. That's it? Yeah. Bingo. Welcome to the Ma'aseh Merkava. And everybody, Eliyahu and Navi says, can do this. It's all a matter of refining the mind, refining the heart, refining our behavior. So, we have multiple techniques of how to do this. And one of them is actually the topic, what we're talking about here. The dream question and the vision quest. Now, this is the PDF. I haven't had a chance to finish it. I've only put down the technique of how to do this. And this is a technique you try tonight even. Just do it. This is one of those techniques, and everything about us is techniques, about how to focus the mind, to get the rational mind with the intuitive mind in sync. So again, what we are experiencing in dream language and the like isn't purple unicorns and the USS Enterprise with Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. It is malachim, holiness, and things like that. We're shifting the mind out of what we call the klipa, the tameh, and into the kedusha. This is why we so much emphasize study the Torah. Don't fill your mind with all this nonsense and garbage that's out there from 101 different sources. Focus, focus, focus. The more you can focus in like a laser beam, the easier you'll be able to cut through the stuff. Okay? Now, you'll see in the comments, whatever the heck it is here, the description on this class, whether you're on Facebook, Patreon, YouTube, you'll see the link to the PDF. As I said, at the time of my recording this, it's not done. So you'll see like there's a section with the ... I haven't gotten to the explanations yet. When I'm finished, I will have all the explanations here. Of course, they'll be given freely to our students of our KosherTorah school, our supporting students, everybody else. Most likely will be available for, a small donation to our school. But anyway, I want to explain to you what I do have here and how to use it. Because everything in the Torah is a code. And just accept it. Don't have to get into all the details of it. And you can say, codes mean like holy names? Yeah. Well, how come Maimonides didn't write about that? Well, you can go into some of the books that were written later who claim that indeed he did. There's always been rumors that Rambam knew about Kabbalah right at the end of his life. But the Kabbalah that the Rambam knew was not Zoharic Kabbalah, which is that metaphysical stuff. No, he knew prophetic stuff. And we have books, Soshan Sodot, amongst others, that have a very big section in there that's bring down old manuscripts that state Rambam actually did work with different combinations of letters and used them in the techniques that are outlined here. So, one of these techniques is actually very old, comes from Rabbi Nachman. All right? This is the first verse in the book of Ezekiel, the famous Ma'aseh Merkava. All right? This is the verse that speaks of the ambitions of God. Translating, all right, it states again, and it was in the 30th year in the 4th on the 5th day of the month, as I was in the midst of the exile by the river Chabar, the heavens opened up, and I saw visions of God. Now, in this verse. Take away a couple letters here and there, according to Rabbi Nachman, and you get 72 letters. 72 is our magic number. Remember the 72 triad name of God? So 72 is a big deal. So some will take this entire verse and write it front, back, front in 24 triads and use this as a meditative chant to cultivate something. And here it is, specific. This is where people make mistakes. Remember I talked about the laser beam focus? If you want to communicate with heaven, you want to have an imaginative experience, you want to have a vision question, you want to ask a question in your dreams, you got to focus. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to do a dream question. And what's my question? Is anybody out there? Hi, can I talk to an angel, please? You're going to get a busy signal, even though they don't exist anymore. Focus, focus, focus. What do you want to know? It's like remote viewing, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're remote viewing. But what are you remote viewing? Well, if I want to remote view, all right, for example, Ingo Swann, the famous psychic, he developed a system in which they used the actual coordinates of longitude and latitude. They got very, very precise. So he would use these numbers and use the abstract focus and go right to that place. Well, these names, or the letters that we're going to extract from this, is a system very similar to that. But you have to have a focus of what it is that you want. None of this nebulous stuff. Not, hey, can I have a spiritual experience, please? No. What do you want to know? I want to know if I should take this job. I want to know if this is the right spouse to marry. I want to know if this is like this or this is like that. I got to know something precise. I got to know something specific. So when you seek specific information, this is the technique of how it works. In this verse, there are 17 words. 17 in the numerical value in Hebrew is Tov. And the initial letters we call the Reshe Tevot. Here it is in the bottom of the page. These are the 17 letters. We group them into 6 groups, corresponding, of course, to the 6 Sefirot. Hagat Nahi. Why? Remember where we're going. We're going into the Yetziratic plane, expanding from this level to that level, and that level has the 6 Sefirot. And that's the emotional plane, and we need to balance it out, and we need to experience it. Now, just a little curious tidbit on the side here. Again, tonight is the 4th night of Sukkot. We honor and celebrate the famous Ushpin Moshe Rabbeinu, and it corresponds to the Sefirot Netzach. And as we know, Netzach and Hod are the sources of prophecy, because that's the access way that the Yesod takes us into the Sephirotic plane. So that's exactly what we're doing here. So these 17 letters you can recite as a chant. Yeah, you can recite them out loud. It's no big deal. But what do they mean? What am I doing? Page 2. Let's analyze some of the numerical values. If you look at the combination of the 17 letters, they add up to 597. That's a curious number. What does it mean? Well, remember what we've got. We're looking for prophecy, nevuah. Prophecy comes from Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Hashem. So, if we were to take the name of Hashem, merge it with prophecy, because that's what we seek. And of course, we wanted it all the 6 Sefirot, so we do it 6 times. So you see here, this is the word nevuah, prophecy, with the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. See the two? You knit them together in that path which you always call. That's what we do, the knitting, the shiluv as we call it. The vowels, according to Abba Lafia, they're always what we call petuhai hotam, the base vowels, not the vowels of the pasuk. So this way we are becoming more abstract, going more into the imaginative, so as to grasp the more fluid and not limiting it within a structure. So we don't recite this. This is not words to be recited, but concepts and constructs to be contemplated. That's why they are called in Hebrew kavanot, or yichudim. So as we're reciting the 17 letters, and we're creating their sounds, How do you do that? In whatever chant, whatever form that you do. If you're of the oi 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 school and you want to pronounce it in an oi 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 way, knock yourself out. If you're of the heavy metal school and you want to pronounce it in a heavy metal form, knock yourself out. Whatever works for you. The rabbinite is laughing over here because she knows she's into the heavy metal. I'm into the heavy metal, all right? Me, I'm not an oi 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 guy, all right? I still do my meditations like Magic Carpet Ride and Highway Star and all the rest because I told you I'm a lunatic. I'm crazy and I don't care anymore. Like I told you. Anyway, as you're chanting this, you're recognizing that you're trying to merge the spirit of prophecy by the name of God because God's name activates. That's what makes it happen. 6 times over because that's the corresponding. And if you look at the numerical value, we said 597, something's missing. Yeah, something's missing from 597. It's only 540. What's missing? 57. Oh, 57. What's 57? What's 57? It's a nice number. What, isn't it like a steak sauce? Heinz 57, something like that? Yeah, that's what it is. Steak sauce, right? You're going off into the klippot. Stop thinking of steak sauce. You can end up in a restaurant somewhere. A restaurant at the end of the galaxy, like Douglas Adams. No. 57 is the numerical value of the Hebrew word magid. Your spirit guide. 57. Oh, it's all a coincidence, right? Yeah, wink, wink, all coincidence. You're channeling spirit of prophecy, activated by the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, through the 6 Sefirot, to channel into your magid. And your magid is the one who will then personify in your mind and talk to you, just like Abu Lafia taught you. You visualize the form of somebody coming to you and you interact with them. This technique of using these 17 letters and just chant them. Yeah, they got to be said out loud. The letters have to be said out loud. Chant them. I don't care what tune you use. I remember a story that happened years ago when I was a Rebbe in the Brisk Yeshiva in Chicago. We had one of the boys who was in the Bet Midrash, and apparently he was humming a tune from some Madonna song. I don't know Madonna songs, but apparently he did. And one of the rabbis came up, listened, heard him, humming this tune, not knowing Madonna, just like I wouldn't know Madonna, and says, "That's a great tune. I really like it." And the boy said, "Thank you." And the rabbi said, "Where's that tune from?" Well, the boy's not going to admit it's from Madonna. So he said that it's a new Hasidic tune that he picked up somewhere. And the rabbi said, "That's really great." And in his innocence, the rabbi said to the boy, who was also a Hazan, prayer leader, says, "I want you to perform the Kabbalah Shabbat prayers Friday night with that tune." The boy's stuck. The rabbi tells him that's what he has to do. That's what he had to do. So that Friday night in Brisk, he was doing Kabbalah Shabbat, Lechadodi, and all that to this Madonna tune. And of course, the rabbi had no idea what he was doing, but all the other boys certainly did. You might think, "Oh, that's horrible." No, it's not. That's Kiddusha. He actually raised up a Madonna song. Cool. Whatever works for you, let it work. Remember what Rambam said about the perfecting. When your heart is right before God, remember, love your Lord with all your heart. When your behavior and your actions and your heart are all in proper balance and everything is for what we call L'Shem HaShamayim. That's what it's all about. I always tell people, like it says in Pirkei Avot, Batel Ritzonecha Lifnei Ritzono, nullify your will before God's will. When you do that, you bring the balance of the Keter all the way down to the Malchut, your emotions are at peace, your mind is clear, and your imaginative faculty now can activate in a healthy, helpful, constructive way, which will bring you revelations and insights. So you see, I taught you a technique here. Didn't take long to teach it, but it takes a lot to explain to you how and why it works. So, whether we're dealing with remote viewing, astral projection, ascent through the Ma'aseh Merkava. It's all one and the same. When I announced this class earlier on Facebook, I noticed that there were some comments made of individuals who were actually afraid of this kind of work. And I said, no, I'm not going to allow that. There's nothing to be afraid of. The fear comes from within the individual who's literally terrified to let go of control and to trust in God. So you've heard the old saying, let go and let God. Well, that's what you got to do. Like Ezekiel, like all the other prophets. If you remember the famous Merkava experience of Ezekiel, he has the big, wild, cool, groovy Merkava experience, which is subjective in time and space. As even Erich Neumann, the famous analyst, psychologist, has written, that the experience of the Ma'aseh Merkava is going to be today in different structures or forms of the conscious mind or the imaginative faculty based upon modern things. And that's very true. But with that being said, what did God have to say to Ezekiel? God shows him this really cool sound and light show, which would have made really great entertainment for a scene from a movie. But God comes to him. What's God have to say? First words, Amod al raglecha v'deber otach. Stand on your feet, and I will talk to you. Standing on your feet, this is symbolic of standing, meaning getting malchut, the feet, in proper alignment. And when you are in proper alignment, you will hear the word. That's speaking. Now, we don't hear directly from God today. No one's thus saith the Lord stuff. But you will become aware of and thus learn to interact with all kinds of entities out there. If you are pure and righteous and good, then you will draw to yourself pure, righteous, and good entities. And just in case you're not, well, you're going to draw to you whatever's inside you. Yeah, a little bit of evil, a little bit of klipa, well, that's going to be it. Rabbi Chaim Vital writes about this, okay? You're going to draw to yourself what's within you. So, rectify, purify. Right now, we're at the beginning of the year, when the Sukkot holiday, we have until Hoshana Rabbah to get everything right, because we said Rosh Hashanah, everything is signed. At Yom Kippur, everything is sealed. At Hoshana Rabbah, which is this Friday, everything's delivered. Well, just in case you're listening to this later, doesn't matter. Get your acts right. Align with the Sefirot. Get your personalities in order. Get your behaviors in order. Become righteous. Become kadosh. Refine the mind. Open the imaginative. Reach out. And you'll be surprised. You will make contact. Okay? Let's conclude on that. You're going to see a whole bunch of classes. We're going to be doing in lesson shorts as well as in our regular stuff here, all focusing on the same thing. We're going to go into the biblical Kabbalah in the Bible itself. We're going to go into all different prophecies. We're going to go into Mishle, into Kohelet, we're going to do all this stuff because we need to focus. We need to elevate. We are living in the most unstable, the most tumultuous of times. This is dangerous times, guys. You know what's going on in the world. You need to have the psychic ability to project into the collective unconscious to make a difference, so that we can together fulfill the great words that in our Torah Jewish tradition we pray every day. Oseh shalom b'imramav, hu berachamav yaseh shalom aleinu. May God, who makes peace in the high heavens, make peace upon us and on all Yisrael, everybody, all of us. V'imru, amen. And on that note, let me conclude and say amen. Thank you all for joining me. Mo'adim l'simcha, hagim l'zmanim, hagim v'zmanim l'sason. Blessings to everybody. Thank you again all for your support. Let's do this together. All right? Et lasot l'Hashem. It's time to act for Hashem. Let's do it. See you all online. Ariel Bar Tzadok, KosherTorah School. Thank you again all for your support. If you like this video, click the like stuff, subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm supposed to do all this business stuff. Ugh, I have no patience for this. You know what needs to be done. I'd appreciate you doing it. Thanks all. God bless. Shalom.